What's the best type of knife for last-ditch defence against a bear, a boar or a tiger? And clue, it's not a sword. Hi folks, Matt Easton here, Schola Gladiatoria. So first up, just to say, this is obviously slightly outside the normal scope of this channel. We're normally looking at military history, the history of arms and armour, weapons used in warfare. However, I do occasionally touch on hunting weapons, and obviously there's a crossover, there's some relationship and interaction between hunting weapons and warfare or dueling weapons. And moreover, for those of you who don't know, I do actually know various people around the world who both hunt, are also involved in conservation, and also just generally live in areas where sometimes they have to travel with things for protecting themselves against things like leopards or bears or lions or whatever. It does happen, okay? So I'm not necessarily advocating for any particular type of activity here. I'm just looking from a basic functional physical point of view, what type of sidearm, particularly looking at knives here, might be the most effective or reliable type of knife, and that's a very important point, to use or to carry in an environment where you might find yourself being attacked at very close range by something like a bear, a boar or a tiger. And I've picked on those particular animals because they are large. They are also things that people I personally know do encounter in the wild, and they're things that sometimes attack people. Right, so first up, swords obviously have been used for hunting throughout history, and in fact if we look at in India, talwars have been used for hunting tigers alongside firearms and bows and crossbows, and indeed even in Europe, hunting swords were often carried to dispatch deer or boar that had been shot previously or sometimes grabbed by dogs. Okay, so for the coup de grace, often swords were used. Now this isn't a hunting sword, but it was the closest thing at hand I had to a hunting sword. This is actually the Royal Armoury's windlass Wakefield hanger, which obviously I studied and helped develop with them. But it is actually functionally quite similar to lots of hunting swords you actually find in the 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th and 19th centuries, and in fact in some parts of the world are still used today. So this is a useful thing that can be used in specific type of hunting. However, swords are only really used in a minority, even historically used in a minority of types of hunting. The primary hunting tools are a missile weapon, obviously in the modern age usually a rifle or a shotgun, and historically a type of bow or crossbow usually, or a musket or arquebus or whatever. So really what we're looking at here is backup weapons, being knives specifically, and specifically looking at the very hardcore animals who have very robust skulls, are very aggressive and have large strong bodies, particularly bear, boar and tiger. So here I have a nice sort of multi-purpose hunting utilitarian knife by Ravensbeak Forge in a sort of a Native American inspired design with a bone handle and a fairly simple single edge blade. Now obviously in most hunting applications for dressing a kill and skinning and just general bushcraft and stuff like this, a knife like this will often do the job, and at a push this is obviously better than nothing. If you're attacked by a bear when you're out hiking or potentially hunting and for some reason a bear attacks you, then obviously any pointy object which has definitely a point, that's the most important part, but additionally an edge, that's also quite useful as well, is going to be better than nothing. But what we're really looking at here are specific knife designs that might be particularly and better equipped for you to protect yourself against an attack from a bear, a boar or a tiger. And there are four main things that I will identify in this video that dictate the choice of design. One of those is the shape of the tip. Another is the cross section of the blade. Another is the size of the overall weapon and also the shape of the blade, if we roll those two into one. And finally, it's the design of the grip or handle or hilt, whatever you want to call it. So how you secure your hand onto the weapon, okay? Now, very briefly, to explain why all those things are important. So, the tip shape is important for penetration, okay? And the tip shape is related to the cross section as well. So fundamentally, a double-edged blade will penetrate more easily than a single-edged blade in most circumstances. And when you're dealing with, for example, a bear's skull or a boar's rib cage or whatever, something quite big and meaty and resisting or with bone in it, a tip that's able to penetrate effectively is very, very important. The cross-section obviously also relates to that, but the cross-section also relates to the strength of the blade. With a particularly large animal, a lot of strength, a lot of momentum, particularly obviously with a bear or potentially a boar or indeed a tiger. They're all bigger and heavier than we are, generally speaking. The cross-section of the blade is very important for strength. Now, you could argue that in some cases single-edged blades can be stronger than double-edged blades, depending on the particular cross-section. But generally speaking, the cross-section and thickness of the blade is very important. Now, the silhouette or shape of the blade is also very important for reasons of both penetration and extraction. We can't assume that a large creature that is attacking you is necessarily going to be put down by one hit, even if it's to the skull. And so you might need to extract it and reinsert it several times. So the shape of the blade and the extractability of the blade is very important. And finally, the hilt design is very important for retention, okay? Now, there are other aspects of hilt design which we could say, like whether you've got the thumb up grip or your hammer grip or whatever, how you're gripping it, whether it's point down or whether it's point up, things like this. But fundamentally, I would say overall, the most important thing when you're dealing with a weapon of self-defense against a large animal in Africa or America or Asia, if a large animal is attacking you, first of all, accessing it and getting it into your hand quickly, and secondly, keeping hold of it and being able to retain it while you're being attacked. So now we're going to look at 4 specific knife types and assess them for their suitability for this task. First of all, the historical sax, or seax as some people pronounce it. Okay, so this is a broken back sax of an English type, blade by Paul Binns, hilt by Todd Cutler, and fundamentally this is a type of knife that would have been used historically for hunting as a backup against bears and wolves and things like this, lynxes potentially as well, in Northern Europe, in what some people call the Dark Ages, so the early medieval period, right the way through to around the time of the Norman Conquest. Now, this has a few problems as a design. It is a very strong blade, and it does have a very pointy tip. So fundamentally, you could say that the blade is quite well designed, and also because of the broken back nature of it, you are not going to get over penetration. Now, over penetration is a problem because beyond a certain depth, the extra penetration ceases to be useful. Okay. Now, you could say that a blade could usefully penetrate up to about 5 or 6 inches and still be doing useful things in defending you. However, most people say kind of 4 inches is about where most things are happening, and beyond that is kind of superfluous. So in a sense, we could say the sax is particularly well designed because it has a natural stopping point around there. You could maybe set the stopping point a bit further back. I probably would. But what's great is you're unlikely to get the whole blade going in because of the way it widens. And it has a fairly thin tip because the edge is located at the front of a wedge. So because the edge is at the front of the wedge, this is nice and acute. So on the surface of it, you could say this is a great hunting blade. And yes, indeed, we're going to get to the Bowie knife. This does have some similarities to a Bowie knife and a lot of the same advantages of a Bowie knife. But the massive disadvantage of a sax, from my perspective, is the hilt. Okay, I absolutely, for the modern world, if you're operating in areas where you might be attacked by a bear or a lion or a boar or something like this, a warthog, I would not recommend at all a grip like this because it's too slippy and slidey, particularly because the thing is going to get driven through your hand here and have your hand end up on the blade. And for any of you who know about the supposed history of the Bowie knife and its design having a cross guard, there you go. I think that was supposedly against a bull, but there we go. A large creature that's attacking you, you don't really want a grip where your hand's going to travel up onto the blade. Very, very bad idea. So, overall, sax, I would say that the blade, great design for this particular scenario. hilt not so much. Right, so let's move naturally onto then the typical Bowie knife or Bowie knife, depending which part of America or Europe you are from. Right, so, or Australia indeed. So, the Bowie knife, great design. Okay, this is a really, really good choice. It's got a lot of the advantage of the Sax. It has a widening blade, so it has an acute point, relatively strong point. And it widens to a natural stopping point, therefore not necessarily stopping in the way that a boar spear would, but impeding and building up friction as you go down, so the depth of penetration is usually unlikely to reach beyond about 5 or 6 inches, which is what you want. You don't want the entire 10 inches of blade going in if you can prevent it, because that will take longer and be more difficult to get out. If you can get it out at all, and something like a boar's skull or a bear's skull, it might just, that might be it. It might be stuck in there, which might be enough, or it might not. There might be, for example, if it was wolves, if you're traveling in areas where you might be attacked by wolves, then indeed one shot through one wolf might kill one, but you want to get it out to deal with the next one. So hyenas, whatever. Okay, so the grip, really good. Good secure grip. You can grip it in a hammer grip or a handshake grip or a thumb up grip, whatever suits you. I would suggest thumb up grip, great for dueling humans, not so great for dealing with an attacking bear. Stick it in a good strong grip. Obviously you can change the design and the details of the grip, give it more friction, give it a rough surface, this kind of things, you can give it a better grip. And the cross guard's super useful because your hand can't be driven up, or at least not easily be driven up onto the blade now, because you have a crossguard to prevent it. The only thing I would say is this coffin-shaped handle grip, your hand can slip off the end of it. So you could argue that it would be better to have some type of pommel or hand stop at the back end to prevent that. And potentially, if it's in its sheath or scabbard, when you're accessing it quickly, having something at the end which has a bit more of a feel to it, like a pommel, might actually help you get it out quicker as well. So Bowie knife, great choice. Now let's just talk about the cross section for a second. It is essentially a wedge cross section, which is nice and strong, gives a good edge bevel angle, but notice that it has the false edge or bevel on the back, which actually assists penetration. Okay, so very often these aren't even sharpened, but it reduces friction going through bone, for example. Right. An adaptation, in some ways even actually earlier than the Bowie knife, you could say, in a direct line, if we ignore the Sax, is this type of hunting dagger. And now these are used in modern boar hunting, okay? And in fact, this is the Mua Bear, and it is designed specifically for that purpose. And it's essentially sort of based on the Bowie knife, except of course it has a dagger point which is double-edged all the way down to here. So this will generally get easier and deeper penetration, but it will go a lot further in. Now you could say that's too much for what you want against something like a hyena or a bear or a boar. However, it depends where you're going. If you're going onto the front of a charging boar, for example, or a bull, then you might want deep penetration. So it really depends partly what you're aiming to do and what you're expecting to encounter. So the deeper penetration could be useful to you, but bear in mind, the deeper you go, the longer it takes to get back out again, which if there are multiple attacking animals or the animal isn't felled by the first blow and you need to go again, that's going to make it more difficult. The grip, pretty good. I actually like the canted grip, and I actually think it gives a bit better angle for penetration, a bit more like a pistol grip. But additionally, I think it also aids retention, because having a curved grip actually means that when you pull out, your hand, your lower fingers have something to work against, rather than a straight line where you're more likely to come off the end. If it is curved like this, as we find with some sabres, it's actually easier to pull it back. Okay, and finally the cross guard, obviously very useful for all the aforementioned reasons, to keep your hand from riding up onto the blade. Now, the last of these four that we're going to look at is an interesting one. So I was specifically asked by Mark Lee, who is a Patreon patron of the channel. So hi Mark, and thanks for asking this question. You are the reason I'm making this video, because you inspired it. So you were talking about bear skulls and people travelling in areas where bears are a real and ever-present risk. Now, I understand for viewers who might be in the UK, for example, you're like, why are you talking about massive hunting knives and hyenas and bears and lions and stuff? Well, like newsflash, a lot of people in the world live in areas where these animals are literally a risk, where you actually have to, obviously you avoid them, and obviously rifles and firearms are the primary way of dealing with them if needed. However, I literally know people who have had to use knives to defend themselves against large creatures. Okay, I'm not going to name names, I'm not going to say where they were, but it is a reality. Okay, if you live in some parts of the world, you might be attacked by a bear or a lion, or indeed a boar. I do know one person who's been attacked by a boar. Anyway, so yes, it is a reality, but it is also, interestingly for this channel, a historical reality. Even in England, okay, people did used to have to deal with bears and wolves. Okay, it's a reality of weapon design. So the final example we're going to look at is the Rondle Dagger. And so Mark specifically asked, would the Rondle Dagger be a good weapon as a backup, obviously after firearms, against bear attack? Now, fundamentally, as I said at the beginning, anything is better than nothing. I'm not saying that this is nothing. I actually think it's pretty good, but I'll get to that in a second. Any type of pointy object applied in the right way will do the same thing. Even a kitchen knife. As modern crime shows, kitchen knives are the predominant knives used in crime and even organised attacks. Kitchen knives do a similar thing. Anything with a point on it or an edge on it can be used in similar ways. So fundamentally, I don't want to make too much of the differences between these things, because they can all do, applied in the right way, they can all do the same thing. But the Rondle Dagger, is it a good weapon against a bear attack or a lion attack? Pretty good, I would say, because it fulfills a lot of the criteria of the previous things we've looked at, which are all things that historically have been used in hunting large game or defending against large animals. But the Rondle Dagger historically was never intended for that. This was a specific weapon that was designed in the 14th century in Europe and carried right the way through to the 16th century, and was used primarily for dealing with armoured opponents, for sticking into armpits and groins and visors and overcoming armoured people. So it has a relatively narrow blade that is very thick compared to other historical knives, with a very slender point and long thin point usually. They can be double-edged or single-edged. Many are a combination of both. So for example, this one it's actually single-edged up to there, and then it has a bevel up the back for the rest of it to aid penetration. And they have a very specific type of hilt which gives them their name, the Rondle Dagger, because they have two rondels, which is very, very secure. It's easy to get out without having to look at it, and it stays in your grip or your gauntlet once you're using it. So on paper, this would be a really good type of backup weapon to carry in a place where you might be worried about being attacked by lions, crocodiles, bears, tigers, things like this. Okay, yes. Huge amount of penetration, very strong blade, very unlikely to break, very secure grip. So the basic answer is yes. Well, despite the fact that knives like this Bowie knife and this boar hunting or bear hunting knife were designed for those purposes, and various other designs in the world have been designed for those purposes, this would do the job really quite well. Now, I do think it has one major advantage for this purpose, and that is the potential for over-penetration. So the reason that Rondle Daggers, not all of them because they vary in size, but the reason that Rondle Daggers are often made so big is for fighting against people using other weapons. Okay, so because this might be your only weapon when someone attacks you with a sword like this, having some extra reach has two big advantages. Number one, it gives you reach, so you can actually not be too disadvantaged in terms of hitting them back, but also it gives you a long bar to defend with. So if you've got a long blade and someone's swinging, say, jabbing a spear at you or swinging a sword at you, you've got a long bar to defend with. And this is not really very useful if you were being pounced on by a bear or a lion, because it becomes unwieldy, it becomes difficult to move the point around. In videos I've done with Todd, I've pointed this out. A small movement here means a huge movement up here, which actually means in a wrestling distance, actually a big blade becomes a bigger liability and more difficult to get where you want it. Number one. And number two, when you do get it where you want it and it goes in, it will go in an awful long way. And it's such a slender blade, thick but narrow, that it will go in a long, long way and be difficult to get back out again. Okay, so overall, I think the Rondle Dagger, yes, it's a reliable weapon, fantastic grip, really, really good grip, and certainly would go in very easily and do the job from that point of view. But I actually think for these sorts of applications, the knives that were evolved for dealing with, defending against or hunting things like bears and alligators and crocodiles and lions and tigers, these hunting knives are basically the optimum. So long as they are well made of good reliable steel with a strong hilt construction, strong tang, so they are reliable and strong in every way. They have a handguard of some sort. They have a secure grip of some sort, either canted or straight, but so that your hand can't slide off easily. They are not overly long, usually 9 or 10 inches, somewhere around there. They have a acute point, but then widens, okay, which prevents or helps prevent over-penetration. And a good thick cross-section, so they're strong against leverage and lateral forces, and these sorts of things, these things we've talked about. So fundamentally, the best things for defending against bears, lions, boars, all of those things are the knives that were designed for that purpose. Surprise, surprise. But absolutely, Mark, or anyone else, yes, a Rondle Dagger could still work. It's just not really optimized for that specific job. Anyway, I hope this has been interestingly thought-provoking. Maybe you massively disagree and you think the Rondle Dagger would actually be better for some reason. You certainly couldn't use it for skinning and dressing things and other general bushcraft tools. It's pretty useless for that. But are there other daggers that I haven't considered here? If we go to India, for example, the katar, the punch dagger, was used in tiger hunting, for example, and boar hunting. And that has a reinforced tip, a broader blade, and your hand's never going to go anywhere because you're holding a bar. So that's actually another good option. So there are other types of knife and dagger out there which could do a similar job. The katar is a great example, and I'd highly recommend the katar. But maybe there's other ones I haven't thought of, Filipino or South American, I don't know. Are there other good ideas that you can think of? Get posting in the comments down below. I hope I'll see you back on the channel really soon. Take care, folks. Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers, folks.